Hello and welcome to Hot and Heavy, the Elaine podcast. I'm your host, Shivani Desai. Today I'll be talking about Season 4, Episode 21, The Handicap Spot. Hello everyone. I hope everyone's doing well. I'm doing all right. It's been a nice and busy week in a good way. Both of my kids are in camp this week, so it's been a little bit more quiet for me. Summers can get a little bit overwhelming just because juggling my projects and then also making sure my kids have a good routine going and have enough activities to keep them from the screen 24/7. So it's been a nice week of them both in camp. And another thing that happened this week, I went to the podiatrist. And for all you Seinfeld fans, you know there are Seinfeld references for podiatry. When I saw the doctor, I did avoid telling her that, she went to podiatry school, not medical school, which I'm sure is grueling in its own way. I did not say any of that. I did not get her opinion on what she thought about the pinky toe. But the reason I was there, and this might be TMI, and I apologize, but I feel like you guys get me by now. I don't really care if it's TMI, but I went because I have toe fungus. Yum. Great. So attractive. Oh my gosh. Well, not only is toe fungus gross to look at, it's also really hard to treat. Holy shit. I found out that two options to treat my toe fungus that might not even work, by the way, both suck for different reasons. So there's an oral medication I could take for 3 months, but as my doctor put it, well, it's basically like taking a pesticide. It's very strong. So we have to monitor your liver the entire time you're taking it so we can ensure that it's not getting damaged. Wow. I was like, my eyes just kept getting bigger going, what? Well, then there's another option, she says. You can get laser treatment for the toe fungus, and that is not covered by insurance. So that could cost upwards of $1,000 to $3,000 out of pocket. And wow, I was like, is there no sort of topical treatment? I can't just brush something on. Well, there are those treatments, but she says they have a very low success rate. And these, horrifying, liver damaging, or super expensive treatments may not even work. She's like, after all of this, it may not even work. And so I just asked her, I was like, okay, well, what would you do? She was very candid and she said, I would do the laser treatment or I just wouldn't treat it. And ding, 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 I am not treating it except to put nail polish over it and cover it up. So yeah, I mean, I have toe fungus, and unless it starts getting worse, she said, look, if it starts hurting or burning, which is horrifying, just watch it. She said it's very slow growing. So I would say if you don't want to do anything right away, that's probably fine. All right, well, I'm not going to do anything right away. So this fungus is one of 3 things I can count now that would make me very unattractive to Jerry and George. So I have a big nose. So George, out the door. I have fungus, which we all know Jerry was horrified by. And I haven't talked about this, but I have very large hands. She had man hands. This is sort of a late in life revelation. It was pointed out to me in a photo one time, and I was like, I just think it's the angle. I was kind of putting my hand out like in mid conversation. It was like a candid photo. And then, no, my hands are pretty darn big. I was sort of like, oh yeah, I can palm a basketball, but that's not weird. I'm tall. So I just figured, well, I think they're in proportion with my body, but, no, I think if I was dating Jerry, he would want me to have hooks instead of hands. Oh, man. And it's a new thing. It's a new insecurity, which is so fun. In my 40s now, I found something new to be insecure about. I find myself like when I'm doing auditions, or I was just doing a callback yesterday virtually, and I was like rehearsing before getting on the call with the casting people. And so I was doing some motions with my hands, and I had to hold a bottle of water in the spot. And I just couldn't. I was like, I don't even have. I can't even say if I'm like, does my hand looks normal to me, but I've looked at this hand for my whole life, so I'm trying to like sort of like position my hands so they're not so front and center. Oh man, new insecurities. It's really not fun. But let's move on to this episode and stop talking about why I'm so unattractive to both Jerry and George, because you know what? I didn't want to date him anyway. The synopsis for the handicap spot is as follows. Jerry and the gang buy an engaged couple an expensive TV for their wedding, then decide to get it back when the couple split. George causes a disabled woman to be injured after he illegally parks his father's car in a handicap spot. An angry mob totals the car and causes George's dad to be arrested. To pay for the damages, George agrees to become his father's butler. Kramer falls for the injured handicapped woman, but mistakenly buys her a defective wheelchair. This episode was written by Larry David. So we start out in Jerry's apartment. George is by the window, and then he approaches Elaine, who's sitting at the table, and asks why good-looking women walk so fast. And she just says, "We don't walk that fast." No, seriously. Seriously, we don't. Elaine calls for Jerry to hurry up. Doesn't want to miss the previews. They're going to the movies, apparently. Jerry comes out, and then she also asks, hey, how are we getting to Scott Drake's party on Saturday? Jerry says, oh no, I forgot to buy a gift. George, classic George, is so pissed that they even have to buy a gift for an engagement party because it never ends, this present stuff. And he doesn't even like the Drake. Elaine and Jerry are appalled. How could you not like the Drake? Who's the Drake? Who's the Drake? The Drake is good. George starts for the bathroom and then mentions that he hasn't even met the fiancé. Oh, whatever. Jerry shows his perfect triangle doodle to Elaine. He's so proud of it. And she says, so what? That's easy. Easy? Kramer enters, and Elaine asks Kramer if he's gotten a gift for the Drake, and he says no. Jerry asks if he likes the Drake. Oh, I love the Drake, and he looks forward to meeting the Drakette. Elaine says, I'm a little lukewarm on the Drakette. Then he spots Jerry's doodle. He is very impressed by this triangle. It's isosceles. Ooh, Kramer would name his kid isosceles. Isosceles Kramer. And then Elaine suggests the chip-in for the gift. Hey, pretty good idea. So they decide to go to the mall before the party, and they also decide to take George's father's car because it has the most room. My take on this scene, it's a really well-written scene, and no surprise, it's Larry David. He's always good with a writing setup. And what I mean by that is it's not overly expositional where they're kind of listing off what's going on and what we need to know about the episode. It's just done very naturally in this casual conversation. We find out about the Drake's party, that they need to get a gift, everyone's feelings about the Drake himself and whether or not they've met the Drakette. And there's even that small hint planted by Elaine that she's lukewarm about the Drakette. We see that there might not be a good match here. Also, the little asides are what make the scene work and achieve that believability. George's comment about the fast-walking, good-looking women and the whole triangle doodle. They're just nice little breaks in all that setup conversation. And you need that so that it's not just all like getting bombarded by information. I love how Elaine is so pleased to include herself in George's comment about good-looking women and how quickly it turns when his response kind of suggests that she may not belong in that category. No, seriously, we don't. And I'd love some feedback on this, because is that what we're supposed to interpret his no, seriously? I think that's the only way to interpret it given her reaction, but I'm just wondering if anyone else feels differently. But that's how I saw it, was that Elaine was taking that as George saying, no, seriously, you're not part of that group, but like, what do you think? And Elaine is totally part of that group. She's a hottie. All right, next we are in the mall parking lot. George, he really likes the area of the mall. He could live out there. And Kramer agrees the four of them should get a house and live together. Of course, Jerry and Elaine are horrified by that. They're having trouble finding a spot, and Kramer suggests parking in the open handicap spot. And Elaine stops him. What if a handicap person needs it? And Kramer makes the argument that they don't even drive. In fact, they don't want those spaces because they'd rather be treated like normal people. And George jumps on that and equates it to feminists not paying the bill at restaurants. I mean, what's that about? We just see Elaine leaning in. What the hell does that mean? And then George pulls into the handicap spot over Elaine's protests. And then we have a little callback moment where Kramer reminds them all not to forget where the car is parked. Don't worry, we're not going to forget it. My take on this scene, I do love the exchange about the handicapped folks not wanting to park in those designated spots. It's such a Kramer take. It's so well done. And you know he's basing it on nothing. He just wants to park there because he's probably sick of driving around. So he's just going to make this bullshit argument. And it makes sense that Elaine is the one to resist parking in the handicap spot. I like that she's the one to protest it. Her response to George's feminist comparison is also great. And I love how quickly he just eases up on his rant. And, you know, that just shows his fear of Elaine is just ever present. I don't think it ever goes away. Okay, next, we are back in the mall parking lot. They're walking to the car now. They've done their shopping. And we've learned that they chipped in to buy the Drake and the Drakette a big screen TV. There was a huge sale. It's actually getting delivered that night at the party. Oh, they're going to be swimming in thank yous. They round the corner and see an ambulance, and they learn that there's been an accident. Jerry approaches a woman to get the scoop, and she says how some jerk parked in the handicap spot, so this woman in a wheelchair had to roll up the incline, but halfway up, her batteries gave out, and she rolled backwards into a wall. So this crowd is waiting for that owner of the car to show up. You know, he's going to pay. Jerry says, oh, sons of bitches. He'd stick around, but, you know, he's got to go. The actress who plays this woman is Kathy Kinney, and I think a lot of you probably recognize her as Mimi Bobek on The Drew Carey Show. And in the Notes About Nothing, she was quoted as saying that she was so excited to be cast on Seinfeld. She said that after she booked the job, she called practically everyone she knew and told them, I'm going to be on Seinfeld. She was so incredibly excited. I love those kind of stories because, you know, especially when you get cast on a show that you're a fan of, I can't even imagine. That's got to be amazing. I think she's great in this scene with Jerry, too. So pissed off. She's got that right temperament, that look on her face, just of disgust. Definitely a realistic character, this pissed off mall lady. I think we've all come in contact. I think they're called Karens now. Sorry, any Karens out there who don't act like Karens and are probably offended by Karen, the term, and you might want to see a manager about that. So it's a full circle thing where you're so offended that you become a Karen. Anyway, moving on. She does a great job, Kathy Kinney. Great job in this scene. And we see a guy like pounding on the car, shouting, come on, you coward. He's riling everyone up. The gang is trying to figure out what to do. They can't abandon the car, so they leave to think of something. My take on this scene, right off the bat, the Notes About Nothing pointed something out here, which I never thought about. The four of them are walking for quite a bit through the parking lot at the top of the scene. So if they were in a handicap spot, why would they be walking such a long way? I just thought that was a good observation. I mean, clearly they needed about a minute to have the conversation about the big screen TV and all of that, the delivery to the party the same night, all that stuff. All that had to come out before they saw the ambulance and the scene of the accident. So, yeah, I guess they just thought, who cares? No one's going to really notice this. But the Notes About Nothing pointed it out. A small thing, I love how George just stares at Elaine after she sings, got to love the Drake. He just like looks at her like, what is wrong with you? As much as I praised the first scene for all the setup coming out so naturally, this scene is a little bit of an example where it's not presented as elegantly, all the, not setup, but just the information needed. It's not terrible by any means, but everything is sort of laid out pretty quickly, stating the information in a way that doesn't really feel that natural. They do try and break it up with George's comments about the veggie burger, which is what you do when you don't want it to be overly expositional. But I'm totally nitpicking here. I realize that. But for you writing nerds out there, sometimes you just have to do your best with sharing the progress of a plot, even if it doesn't turn out as natural as you'd like. Next, we see them at a cafe, I think in the mall, and they're trying to figure out what to do. I love Jerry's line. Well, how did this get to be the crime of the century? It's not like we put a broomstick in her spokes and she went flying. And George says just because the batteries went dead, couldn't she have just rolled it with her hands? And Kramer's like, yeah, you would think. You know what? She must have been rich and spoiled, wants to take it easy in her wheelchair. Elaine mentions, well, their big screen TV is probably arriving at the party. Jerry gets the idea. You know what? We'll give the keys to Elaine. Men won't hit a woman. Oh, they won't? Not if they don't know you. Elaine says Kramer should go. It was all his idea. And he's very dramatic. No chance in hell. Jerry thinks of creating a diversion and then jumping into the car. And if that doesn't work, they'll give him Kramer. And then we see them approach a very smashed up, very damaged car. The mob is gone, but the car is in bad shape. My take, it's a funny scene. Elaine doesn't get enough comedy, in my opinion. My favorite lines are Jerry's and George's, the whole rich, spoiled wheelchair person. I love that line about putting the broom in her spokes. It's just a funny visual. Elaine's reaction to Jerry's comment about how men won't hit a woman, I've always been confused by that response, only because just the look she gives him, it could almost suggest that Jerry hits her. Of course, we won't know what happened, but the, oh, they won't response with her like gesturing with her eyes and her face towards Jerry. And then his, not if they don't know you. I just think that could be handled better because it's totally absurd, of course, to think Jerry ever was violent towards Elaine. But that couplet of dialogue, I've never been a fan of it. It's a little clunky. It's a little confusing. What is the subtext there? I don't know. It could just be as simple as her saying like, that's bullshit. Men hit women all the time. But her expression and the way she's very pointed at Jerry, it gives the very inaccurate impression that Jerry could have hit her, which of course didn't happen. But again, nitpicking, just a really weird kind of exchange there that I always found confusing. It's a nice touch that Elaine mentions how the big screen TV is probably being delivered while they're stuck there. It's just, this device to remind the audience of the placement of everything, what's going on, the timing of that night. And so I appreciate that. Wow, there's lots of nerdy writing commentary here, but hey, you know what? I'm just imparting some knowledge so that we can all learn something. All right, next we're at the Costanza's house. Frank is, of course, so upset with George. Now, I want to mention really quick, this episode was reshot after George's father was recast. John Randolph played the original Frank Costanza, but as we all know, Jerry Stiller took over that role later in the series. So I watched both versions. I think they're both good in their own way. I really like John Randolph. I have a soft spot for him. He was Clark's father in Christmas Vacation. I just think he's adorable. I know he's done way more than that, but that's what I know him from. And of course, Jerry Stiller. I mean, Jerry Stiller is Frank Costanza. So I just also find it so fascinating that they reshot those scenes. And it was purely for syndication purposes. So Larry David thought this would be confusing if, there was this one episode with John Randolph as the father. Now, they didn't do that with Jerry's father because there was a different actor playing Jerry's father in season 1. Larry David does mention in the inside look, we decided to do it with this one. We didn't do it with Jerry's father. I guess he said something like the actors had aged too much by that point. It had been about 4 years. So they reshot all of these scenes with Jerry Stiller for syndication. So George makes up that Nazis had cut them off and they were hurling racial epithets at them. Estelle is in the main room of the condo playing mahjong with her friends. And she says, I told you not to lend him your car. Frank is so upset. The whole thing is a total loss. And he doesn't care that George didn't get hurt. That's not the point. Estelle's friends ask what George is up to. He explains that he's writing a pilot for NBC. Ooh, they are so impressed. What is it about? He explains the plot, the whole butler thing, and they're so tickled. It's the same situation. Frank, maybe you ought to make him your butler. The actresses who play these friends are Fritzi Burr, Norma Janis, and Ina Parker. All of them are adorable. I love them. I love how amused they are with George maybe being Frank's butler. I just love these ladies. They're perfectly cast. Estelle blames Kramer for the incident. Every time you're with that Kramer, something happens. And that she used to think Jerry was nice. I don't know what happened to him. And then Estelle wins. Mahjong. Next, we're in Jerry's apartment. Elaine is practically having sex with Oreos while Jerry's on the phone with the Drake. Apparently, it was a great party and that they loved the TV. And then Drake invites Jerry and Elaine to go get something to eat since they missed the party. Yeah, they're down for that. Jerry gets off the phone. Oh, so enamored with the Drake. He loves the Drake. And Elaine agrees. Oh, she's so happy for them. And Jerry says, well, I don't know. I mean, I'm glad they're happy, but it really does nothing for me. Elaine does a silly laugh face to Jerry, which he returns before buzzing George up. Kramer enters. He went to see the handicapped woman, and he's in love with her. She is the most beautiful woman he's ever seen. And yeah, he's going to ask her to marry him. I mean, he's that much in love. And he says she has everything I've ever wanted in another person, except for the walking. George arrives, and Kramer tells him that they need to buy a wheelchair for that woman. He's in love with her. George is, of course, reluctant, says maybe his father can get her one from the United Volunteers. No, she needs it now. Well, Jerry and Elaine aren't going to chip in. They told them not to park there. And George is, of course, cheap-ass George is like, well, why can't we just fix the old one? Kramer guilts him by painting the picture of this woman crawling along Fifth Avenue. Then George just blows up by the end. Wheelchairs, engagement presents. It never ends. My take on this scene, I never get tired of seeing Elaine eat Oreos. I mean, especially since Kramer's voice is in my head about how she's practically having sex with them. It always is true. And I think a lot of people eat Oreos like this. Controversial take. I am not a fan of Oreos. Well, I'm not a fan of just eating plain Oreos. I like them crushed up into like a pie crust, or at my Cold Stone, I'll have a mix-in of Oreos with my coffee ice cream. But yeah, just eating them just on their own, they're way too sweet for me. And I don't like the part that Elaine's scraping with her teeth. I do not like the cream in the middle, or whatever it is, whatever it's stuffed with. I'm not a fan. So much Seinfeldian stuff happens in this scene. The comment by Jerry about how, does nothing for him if the Drake and Allison are happy. That's so Seinfeld. In fact, it's so Larry David. I mean, I can so hear his voice. And I've said this before, now that we've been exposed to Larry David in so many seasons of Curb Your Enthusiasm in his true form, I can just hear Larry David saying that. Like, well, I mean, I'm glad they're happy, but it does nothing for me. Oh, so his voice. And then, of course, George blowing up over having to buy a wheelchair, goes on about the presents. It's just so classic Seinfeld. I love that little silly moment between Elaine and Jerry, that little laughing face after he says his comment. It's very cute. Next, we are at the wheelchair store. There's a very enthusiastic wheelchair salesman. He is showing them what he calls the Rolls Royce of wheelchairs, but it is really expensive at, I think, $6,200. Next, we are at the Drake's apartment. Jerry and Elaine enter, all smiles and hugs. They're so excited to see that TV that they got them. Were you guys just blown away or what? Jerry says he's going to make sure he watches every Super Bowl here, every big fight. Then he asks, so where are we going to eat? Elaine is really hungry. The Drake says, actually, we just broke up. Oh shit, it's awkward. Apparently, the Drake and the Drakette broke up 20 minutes before Jerry and Elaine arrived. And so as they're explaining what happened, with every bit of info, Jerry and Elaine inhale and look over at the TV. The Drake apologizes, and then he starts sobbing while Allison just rolls her eyes in the background. Elaine asks about any good Italian places around here. Gagliano's. That's pretty good. Jerry and Elaine get the hell out of there. Elaine almost leaves with the remote. And Drake is just getting louder and louder with his sobs. Oh, God. The actress who plays Allison, or the Drakette, is Elizabeth Dennehy. She is the daughter of actor Brian Dennehy. I did not know that, and I did a full-on, oh, when I found that out. She has appeared in many television shows and films. Not a ton for her to do in this episode, but you know what? She has a really good bitchy vibe, I have to say. I didn't like her on sight, and that's what we were supposed to feel. And my take on this scene, I really love it. The immediate change in tone when Drake drops the bomb about he and Allison just breaking up is done so well. Obviously, it's an awkward moment, but those shots of Jerry and Elaine's faces in horror while they turn to the television over and over again, it's so well done. We've all been there. It's hard to know what to say. It's hard to know where to look. So let's just say nothing and keep turning to this TV that's making noise over here. I love it. It's so natural and very relatable. There's an insensitive Elaine moment when she asks if there are any good Italian places, but she's angry and she doesn't really care. Okay, another writing nerd alert, but what I notice in this scene is just the heightening of how everything's getting uncomfortable. Definitely starts with we just broke up. But then Drake's crying gets louder and louder, just to the point where you're cheering for Jerry and Elaine to just get out of there. So it's just a really good way to, present this situation and how incredibly awkward it is. And it reminds me when friends of mine who didn't have kids would come over and would clear the fuck out when my kids started having tantrums or started crying. And you know what? I didn't blame them. I did the same thing before I had kids. I mean, if you don't want to be around that, get the hell out of there. So I totally get it. All right, back really quick to the wheelchair store. Kramer and George finally agree to buy a used wheelchair for $240. All right, next we are at Jerry's apartment. Jerry found out that Drake gave Allison the TV and he gave her all the gifts because he felt guilty. Elaine is upset, but that's our TV. Boy, I'm really starting to dislike the Drake. Hate the Drake. Elaine and Jerry have officially turned on the Drake. George arrives. He's excited to hear about the breakup. Oh, well, then we'll get the TV back. It'll help defray the costs of the wheelchair. Well, no, the Drakette took it. But it's not hers, it's theirs. Once there's no theirs, it can't be hers, it should be ours. Well, she has it. Ugh, see? This is vindication for George. See? I told you the Drake wasn't good. I hate the Drake. We should call her. And then George and Jerry convince Elaine that she should call because that's her thing. Calling people I hardly know and demanding they return expensive gifts, that's my thing. Yeah, that's your thing. So she calls Allison, and right away, Allison knows what she's calling about and says, I gave all the gifts to charity. Okay, sorry again about you and the Drake. I hate the Drake. Everybody does. Bye-bye. And Elaine tells Jerry and George she gave all the gifts to charity. George is even more upset. Kramer enters. He's so excited. He gave the wheelchair to that woman, and she loved it. And her old one wasn't good anyway, so it was all a God blessing. You mean a blessing in disguise? Yeah. My take on this scene, the turning on Drake is so fun, and I love that George is validated here in his feelings. It's very funny, very well done. The call to Allison by Elaine is great. I love the voice she uses in the conversation, especially the everybody does. Bye-bye. JLD is so good at this almost radio voice she does when she's, I guess, like trying to elevate herself or being overly polite, or maybe like acting more classy. She uses this voice and it's so effective. And she sort of proves why Elaine should do this call because she's so smooth. The reaction to the charity thing always cracks me up. That's appalling. How could anyone be so selfish and inconsiderate? Now, I have my feelings about this, but I was wondering, what is the etiquette here? I mean, charity is great, but I do think Allison sucks for not returning the gifts. I mean, I agree with George. Once there's no theirs, it should be ours. So I did some extensive research. I Googled and looked at some etiquette websites about this topic. And for the most part, gifts should be returned to the gift givers, but it also depends on how long after the gift was given, whether or not it should be returned. So in this case, it's pretty clear. Those gifts should have been given back 100%. No wonder Elaine is lukewarm on the Drakette. She sucks. Next, we're back at the Costanza's house. Frank is being honored by the United Volunteers. He's the recipient of the Silver Circle Award, Volunteer of the Month. He's raised over $22,000. They're all applauding for him as he gets his plaque. But the police arrive and arrest him for parking in a handicap spot. The actress who plays the United Volunteers woman who is giving Frank his award is Nancy Lenehan. Ba 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 bum ba dum bum 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 bum. We have a Gilmore Girls Seinfeld connection, ladies and gentlemen. Nancy Lenehan played LaDawn, who is the owner of the Cheshire Cat in the episode Road Trip to Harvard. So she is the B&B owner that, the girls don't really like. The Gilmore Girls are not a fan of LaDawn or the Cheshire Cat. But I actually just watched that episode randomly, and then I watched this episode of Seinfeld. So I didn't really have to do much research to figure out this Gilmore Girls Seinfeld connection. Besides Gilmore Girls and Seinfeld, she has been in everything. I mean, just her IMDb goes on forever. And she's one of those actresses that seems familiar. You know you've seen her in one thing or another. And I also know she plays Jonah Ryan's mother in Veep, and she's amazing in that as well. A lot of times she plays like the same kind of character, but she's so good at it. I always love her, such great energy on camera. Next, we're at Jerry's apartment. George tells Jerry his father got arrested right in the middle of his United Volunteers meeting, and that his father chased him around with a baseball bat when he got home. Between the car being towed, the ticket, he can never repay him. So he agreed to become his butler. Excuse me? Kramer enters. It's over. So Lola, the handicap woman, dumped Kramer, told him he was a hipster doofus, he's not good looking enough for her, told him to drop dead. Jerry and George are horrified. George says, I'd never even heard that one, and she's pretty rough. Well, we just blew $240 on a wheelchair. Jerry's a little suspicious of that amount. Well, it was slightly used. Used? Then we cut to a shot of Lola going down a hill and screaming because the wheelchair malfunctions. The actress who plays Lola is Donna Evans, and she's actually a stunt woman who has worked on hundreds of films doing stunt work. And, there's not much to say. She screams very well in this episode. Next, we're at the Costanza's house. George is in full butler mode. He's vacuuming and then gets interrupted by Frank, saying he didn't do a good enough job with shining his shoes. Do you see your face in there? Frank gets a phone call. And you hear his side of the conversation. You hear, oh, right down the hill, huh? Frank gets off the phone. He tells George, okay, we need to help this woman. Someone got her a wheelchair with defective brakes. Sons of bitches. So he needs George to pick up a big screen TV and deliver it to her. That's the Jerry Stiller delivery of that line. And it makes me laugh every time. It's so weird. But I love it. I love it. Deliver it to her. George makes the connection. He knows which TV that is, so he's really excited about it. And he knows Lola's a total bitch, so she doesn't deserve that TV. All right, so at the ending of the episode, we see George and Kramer arrive at the Drake's apartment disguised as United Volunteer workers. The Drakette lets them in and shows them where the TV is. Next, we're back in the mall parking lot. George confirms that Elaine has the receipt and that they're going to get cash back for the TV. It's all going to work out. And they can't find a parking spot again. Kramer suggests parking in front of the fire hydrant. What are the chances of a fire happening? And that's where we end the episode. Okay, I'm going to take a quick break and I will see you on the other side.
Everyone has their thing, even you. That's right, a skill you've mastered that may not fit into any conventional job or trade, but it's a skill nonetheless. Now your thing could help you earn cash with That's My Thing. That's My Thing is a website where you can list your unique thing as a paid service.
I hired a gal from That's My Thing to fold all of my fitted sheets. She came over, and it was like watching Michelangelo paint on a ceiling. She folded all my weirdo-shaped sheets so neatly, it almost brought me to tears. Totally worth the money. Thanks, That's My Thing.
That's My Thing has over 150 different categories of things to offer. From calling family members to borrow money to properly chip clipping your bags of chips, your thing is sure to fit in and help someone.
My 4-year-old wanted a triangle-themed birthday party. I wanted to hire some entertainment and found Isosceles the Clown on That's My Thing. He came and entertained the kids with triangle-based humor, games, and songs. A triple-sided threat, as he says. Thanks, That's My Thing.
People told you for years that your thing was useless. Maybe you were even mocked for it. Now is your chance to prove all those haters wrong. Ever since college, I cut the sleeves off my sweatshirts. It's my thing. I listed that on That's My Thing, and I got hired a bunch of times. Sometimes people want me to cut off their sweatshirt sleeves. Other times, they just want to hang out with the guy wearing a sleeveless sweatshirt. I was finally able to pay off my student loans. Thanks, That's My Thing. Share your thing today on That's My Thing. Visit our website, youwilllovemything.thing, and sign up for a membership. Before you know it, you'll be getting paid for your thing. That's My Thing. Not a waste of time anymore.
And we're back. In the notes about nothing, they mentioned an incident that I wanted to relay to all of you. So apparently in the studio parking lot, there was an incident. Julia Louis-Dreyfus had been instructed to park in a different spot. It was actually one spot over from her regular spot due to some parking lot work that was being done. And that spot happened to belong to Tom Arnold, who at the time was married to Roseanne Barr. Both of them, Tom and Roseanne, they took JLD parking in his spot personally and left an expletive-filled note on her windshield. So, knowing this was just a misunderstanding, apparently JLD and Jason Alexander tracked down Tom Arnold and explained, what happened and the reason for the parking lot faux pas. And then the first day JLD returned to her own parking spot, Roseanne, using soap, wrote 2 obscenities onto her windshield and left a Polaroid snapshot of a man's hairy ass. And then Tom and Roseanne proceeded to go on talk shows discussing the situation. And also, even at that year's Oscars, Billy Crystal incorporated a joke about the whole affair in his opening monologue. So, yeah, what the fuck? All I have to say about that is the old adage, success is the best revenge. I mean, JLD has about 14 jillion awards and has been on 3 hit TV shows, while Roseanne got kicked off a show named Roseanne about Roseanne. So, yeah, I think that says it all. And Tom Arnold is doing, who knows exactly. I think we can all agree who the winner of that situation is. All right, moving on to Contributor Corner. Greg's thoughts this week. He says, while I do love an episode where all 4 leads are together for the main plot, this episode is not one of my favorites. I think, similar to the series finale, where their wrongdoing indirectly causes someone harm, it makes me uncomfortable that they are the bad guys. I want to believe that these 4 are good people who discuss doing something wrong but don't actually do it. Kudos to Elaine for being the voice of reason when it comes to the handicap spot, but she was overruled as usual. Yeah, I see where you're coming from, Greg. It's not, this isn't my favorite episode. It's not my least favorite episode, but yeah, I see where you're coming from. They're unlikable people in general, but it's a very blatant, shitty thing that they do in this episode. So definitely see where you're coming from. Next, Greg says, I have to say I love seeing Mimi from the Drew Carey show here. Something about her in this part is still funny, even though she doesn't really have anything funny to say. Her voice and whole demeanor are funny to me. Also great finally seeing Jerry Stiller as Frank Costanza. While I know there was a different actor originally who also filmed this episode, nobody is more perfectly cast than Jerry as Frank. Yes, agreed on all of this. Mimi from Drew Carey, Kathy Kinney, she's very memorable. It's such a short scene, but there's just like that look, that little scowl on her face, and the way she's looking up at Jerry, and the way she delivers her lines. It is really fun and really well done. And that's a mark of a really talented performer. You sort of take a very small role and make it memorable, and that's certainly what she's done here. I have a soft spot for John Randolph as the original dad, but there's nothing like Jerry Stiller. Just in the deliver it to her. that it's like if you're just side by side with those two, it's like that's the magic sauce that Jerry Stiller puts on every single line of dialogue. It's so great. Greg goes on to say, the Drakette sucks. The fact that this woman donated all the gifts she had just gotten days earlier shows how awful she is. Elaine was right to be lukewarm on her. I like how Elaine fights being the one to call her and yet still does it. Yeah, I love all of that. The Drakette does suck. And according to etiquette websites everywhere, she should have returned those gifts. I mean, she probably fooled herself into thinking she was being really a good person because she made a donation to charity, but it's like, no, it's actually a little bit of a slap in the face to those who got you those gifts. And it's very sibling-like with Elaine fighting, being the one to call Allison, but I do like that the way she walks over, it's my thing. She kind of like mopes over to the phone. Funny. Next, Greg says, I have to give it to George in this episode. He gets so many great lines. Every instance he fights against doing the right thing and yet still gets burned when he does do the right thing. My favorite scene is when they are in the restaurant waiting to go back to the car. When George says, it must have been one of these rich, spoiled handicapped people who didn't want to do any work, just sit in their wheelchair and take it easy. I laughed hard. That scene is chock full of really great comedy. Unfortunately, none of it goes to JLD as Elaine, but it's, the broom and the spokes. And then, George just, making it this handicapped person's fault. It's so Seinfeldian and so great. And so Larry David, I mean, again, you just hear his voice throughout all of this. And finally, Greg says, all in all, this episode feels much like the ones in the first couple of seasons. A very simple premise and the four of them together, and while it has some funny lines, JLD doesn't get a ton of the jokes, which I will forgive considering George and Frank's scenes are always some of my favorites. Yeah, I mean, I think there are so many funny moments in this episode, but yeah, unfortunately, our Elaine doesn't get that, and I will address that in a little bit. Thank you so much, Greg, for once again contributing to the podcast. And if any of you out there would like to contribute to Hot and Heavy, please email me at elainepodcast@gmail.com. That's elainepodcast@gmail.com. All right, my favorite Elaine moments, I think it's that phone call, and particularly that last moment. Everybody does. Bye-bye. And then that turn, she gave all the gifts to charity. I love how she goes from that little persona of being very polite to Allison to just that disgust when she tells the guys. She changes the tone of her voice. She changes her facial expression. Very fun. An honorable mention to the way she drops her pretzel after Drake says they just broke up. It's so small, but just another little very fun physicality moment. And my final notes. It's a very balanced episode in the sense that everyone is involved in the main plot of the handicap spot. Elaine doesn't get too much of the comedy in this one, unfortunately. Some fun moments, but all the comedy and really funny lines go to Jerry, George, and Kramer, and they do a great job with them, so I can't fault the episode as a whole. I just wish they gave a bit more to Elaine. Like, I would have loved to see Elaine and Allison maybe have a little bit of an interaction, maybe a little bit of a confrontation, like a Rava style. I don't know. That would have been fun. Overall, it's a very strong Seinfeldian flavored episode. Lots of Elaine screen time. I just wish that there was more Elaine comedy. Well, I think that's all I can say about the handicap spot. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.